Father God, we come before you grateful for the season that we have been blessed with. And hopefully, we have all been able to enjoy time with family over this Christmas holiday, and it has renewed our spirits as we go forward. Help us to learn more from your will and to share with other people the meaning of Christmas, the direction of pointing people to Christ through our lives. Help us in all we do, Father, to seek and do your will. And in Christ we pray. Amen. So if you were following along, this is slide 353 we're starting at this week. And if this week goes well, I'll get a couple more weeks ahead. I've got about a week and a half done right now. Keep trying to get further along. We started into Joshua. So we've crossed the Jordan River. Moses has passed. Joshua is leading the people of Israel now. Of course, he's doing this at somewhere around 70, 80 years old, because he was one of the 12 spies. And now he is the leader of Israel. Chapters 15 through 20, I didn't want to sit here and read them, but it describes the allotment of the territory of Israel, and I thought I'd just grab a map that summarizes the chapters. This is roughly speaking where the tribes are going to be, where they're supposed to be. Of course, as we're at this stage in Joshua, they're not in all these lands yet. What we've seen so far is they're more up here. They've got the eastern territory because they took that before crossing the Jordan. And then the northern campaign has just happened where the Canaanite tribes tried to unite against Israel, and that went well for Israel. But this is, roughly speaking, the allotment that they were supposed to have. Now, of course, Philistine is not supposed to have an allotment. They're just there, and they're going to be hard for the Israelites to dislodge for some time. Mouse has been acting up on me today. I don't know what the deal with that is. In Joshua 15, Israel doesn't have full possession of the land, including the coastal areas, like down here was Philistine. These coastal areas are the most densely populated. They're near the water, so they're some of the hardest to take. It's also plains, which means when you start talking about people who have horses and chariots, they're a lot harder to defeat than just other foot soldiers are. The other area they're lacking is the mountains. So you can kind of see the topography here. We've got these mountainous regions. This is where Israel had the defeat before the 40 years in the wilderness. They had tried to fight up this side into the mountains. And that's also going to notably include Jerusalem. At this point in the Old Testament, the Israelites have not taken possession of Jerusalem. Then, of course, notably when we're talking about this allotment is that the Levites do not have a territory. They have cities that are spread out throughout the land. And the Canaanites are still present in the territory of Ephraim. So we've still got Canaanites throughout here particularly, and then Philistines are over here. They're distinct people, but they're both have a common interest in not letting Israel continue to take the promised land. So let's talk about the Levites in Joshua 20. They're assigned these cities of refuge. Actually, this is not all of the Levite towns, but these are Levite towns. Then the Lord said to Joshua, "Tell the Israelites to designate cities of refuge as I instructed you through Moses, so that anyone who kills a person accidentally and unintentionally may flee there to find protection from the avenger of blood. When they flee to one of these cities, they are to stand in the entrance of the city gate and state their case before the elders of that city. Then the elders are to admit the fugitive into their city and provide a place to live among them." This was the best map I could find to indicate where the cities of refuge are. And of course, they're spread out throughout all the territories so that you didn't have to run across all of Israel to be able to get to one. I thought noteworthy to indicate, we saw it in that description we just read in Joshua, which of course wasn't the full instruction, that was given back in the law, but it emphasized this isn't just for anybody to flee from their crime. This is for the innocent. So you have to present your case to the elders of the city that you're innocent of the person's blood who you killed, and that's why you should be admitted to the city of refuge. Now, it's not necessarily instantaneous. You have to do it the first moment you get there, but they have to do it. It also says they're at the city gate. Well, that's where the leading people of the town tended to gather. We saw that back with Lot. When he's at Sodom and Gomorrah, instead of being outside the city where he was supposed to be grazing his flocks, he's at the city gate. He's become one of the leading people of the city of Sodom. So it's one of those subtleties that happens, but the elders would be at the city gate. That's where you would present your case. Now, we've also seen some of these cities show up before. Hebron certainly has come up quite a few times as we've talked about this. It was a city of Abraham. Last week we saw Caleb taking possession of it. Shechem was another one we have certainly seen as we've talked so far. Ramoth Gilead was another big one that we saw with Jacob. So these cities of refuge had historical significance to the Israelites even as they get here, because it's the cities of the patriarchs, at least in some cases. So now we'll talk about the Levites. Now the family heads of the Levites approached Eleazar the priest, Joshua son of Nun, and the heads of the other tribal families of Israel at Shiloh in Canaan, and said to them, "The Lord commanded Moses that you give us towns to live in, with pasture lands for our livestock. So as the Lord commanded, the Israelites gave the Levites the following towns and pasture lands out of their own inheritance." So, of course, it's going to describe from which tribe this land came from, because they're all giving up something to Levites. We talked about this. The Levites are spread throughout the nation to try and serve all of the people. There's 48 cities across the 12 tribes, and of course the 12 tribes are to Joseph, Ephraim and Manasseh. We'll talk about that more later, but they are the tribe of Joseph. And this is a time of peace for the Israelites, relatively speaking. Now, there's still Canaanites, there's still the Philistines, and there's still some hostile forces over here to the east of the Jordan and the inheritance there. So it's not finished yet. They have not anywhere near taken possession of the full promised land. But this is a relative time of peace, and that's the context in which Joshua is going to release the eastern tribes. So, again, Manasseh, Gad, Reuben, they had taken their possession, and then when the Israelites crossed Jordan, they said, in exchange for getting our rest, our land now, we'll lead the fight to take your land over on the western side of the Jordan. So they've been present in all of the fighting so far, and here in Joshua 22 is where they're going to return to the eastern side of Jordan. So in verse 9, the Reubenites, the Gadites, and half the tribe of Manasseh left the Israelites at Shiloh in Canaan and returned to Gilead, their own land, which they had acquired in accordance with the command of the Lord through Moses. When they came to Gilroth, near the Jordan, in the land of Canaan, the Reubenites, the Gadites, and half the tribe of Manasseh built an imposing altar there by the Jordan. And when the Israelites heard they had built an altar on the border of Canaan and Gilead near the Jordan on the Israelite side, the whole assembly of Israel gathered at Shiloh and to go to war against them. So this is near Gilgal, as best as they can tell us. It's very near Jordan. And this is near where the whole thing started from. After the Israelites crossed Jordan, Gilgal is where they set up. This is a very significant location to the Israelites at this time. I tried to think of something comparable to point to in how they might view it, and the best I could come up with was Gettysburg. We just look at Gettysburg differently than basically any other city in America, and I think that's That's kind of the best analogy I could come up with as I was trying to think of one. Not to say it is the best, just it's what I came up with. And this is central for the eastern tribes. So the three tribes, Manasseh, Gad, Reuben, they're spread out across the Jordan River on the eastern side. Gilgal is kind of central to that. So this is a logical crossing point for the tribes that they would go across here and then they would split out to their various towns and territories as they go across. Now, why did the whole of Israel unite to go to war with them over this? Well, I didn't specifically talk about the, not Acorn. Is it Achish? He was a man who took plunder from a city that the Israelites weren't supposed to, and then all of a sudden they start having defeats until the whole Israel stoned him for robbing from God, basically. And so this was a big deal. And remember, they still have a lot of territory to take. So this is a big deal if the eastern tribes are rebelling against God. They're concerned about what that means for the future. So in that context, it starts to make more sense why they're immediately assembling to fight over this. But of course, for the eastern tribes, what this was just a monument to say, hey, we were here. We were part of this. So in future generations, nobody over there claims, hey, the Jordan River's the difference between us. We're different people. No, we're all one people, and this is just a monument we put up to remind everybody that we were here. It was not a rebellion. It was quite the opposite was the intent, and everyone is able to go home peacefully from there. But it's a huge moment as you almost have a civil war break out in Israel for the first time, though unfortunately it will happen in the future. We're approaching the end of Joshua, and in 24, I put down renewed. I'm almost not confident that that's the right word for it, but reminded. He's reminding the Israelites the covenant that they have promised to keep and what they're supposed to do going forward. This is also something that they had been instructed to do once they were in the promised land. This back at Sinai, back in wandering the desert, they're like, when you get here, do this big reminder that you're supposed to over what the law is. So in chapter 24, Joshua assembled all the tribes of Israel at Shechem. He summoned the elders, leaders, judges, and officials of Israel, and they presented themselves before God. Joshua said to all the people, "This is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. Long ago your ancestors, including Terah the father of Abraham and Nahor, lived beyond the Euphrates River and worshipped other gods. But I took your father Abraham from the land beyond the Euphrates and led them throughout Canaan and gave him many descendants. I gave him Isaac. To Isaac I gave Jacob and Esau. I have assigned the hill country of Seir to Esau, but to Jacob and his family went down to Egypt." So we get kind of this quick overview reminding them of where they actually come from. This is happening in the northern territory. So again, we've got Jericho as kind of a major point of interest we can look at. This is the Jordan River. The Dead Sea is down here. Galilee would be up here. And we're over in this area, which is Shechem. This would be the territory of Ephraim by the allotment of the 12 tribes, which is something I'm going to try and set context on as we're going forward through events from now on. In the days of Jesus, this would be Samaritan land. So, as you've probably heard in various stories, the Jews tended to stay away from the Samaritan land. They would actually cross over the Jordan, go down, and then cross back over to go to Jerusalem just to not go through Samaritan land. Israel hasn't gone to the south particularly since in Joshua's lifetime. They fought the northern campaign, and we've already talked about who's remaining. This is kind of a modern look at what they've uncovered archaeologically for Shechem. I didn't have anything particularly noteworthy of it here. I think there was an altar they found here, although they don't date it all the way back to Joshua by any means. It's just that there is one here. And of course, you'd have the Samaritans here, so they would have practiced a different religion than the Jews in the intervening years. In chapter 24, we see the end of Joshua's life. So this begins in verse 29. After these things, Joshua son of Nun, the servant of the Lord, died at the age of 110. So he's been leading Israel for about 30 years at this point. And they buried him in the land of his inheritance at Timnath Sherah in the hill country of Ephraim, north of Mount Gash. Israel served the Lord throughout the lifetime of Joshua and the elders who outlived him and experienced everything the Lord had done for Israel. I thought I had specifically made a point of this. I think it's on another slide, so I won't worry about it just yet. Now, something else has happened here. Of course, the Israelites came from Egypt. Who had brought the Israelites to Egypt? They went there during the famine, and Jacob had brought his descendants there. Jacob had been buried in the Promised Land already. We saw that back in Genesis. Joseph had not. Joseph was still in Egypt and knew what God had promised, and so he made his brothers, his family members swear that they would bring his bones from Egypt to the Promised Land. So all this time, they've had Joseph's remains traveling with the Israelites because, again, this was part of the promise. They knew what was coming. They knew what had been promised with them, and now they're going to fulfill the oath that had been made to Joseph all the way back in Egypt. So verse 32, Joseph's bones, which the Israelites had brought from Egypt, were buried at Shechem in the tract of land that Jacob had bought for 100 pieces of silver from the sons of Hamor, the father of Shechem. This became the inheritance of Joseph's descendants. And then we talked about this being Manasseh, and Ephraim and Manasseh were the tribes that came from Joseph. So it's a very logical place for him to be laid to rest. For Joshua, this is about as close as we can get to placing where he is. It was a little hard to scale this, but this is Jerusalem down here to kind of give us an orientation point. In Joshua 19, they had done the allotment of all of the tribes, and once all of that was done, a city was given to Joshua himself. So Joshua gets a city, and this is where we are seeing it. In the present day, this is the West Bank area. So whenever the West Bank comes up in the news, that's the area in which Joshua, his city was, and where he's laid to rest. Just noteworthy that there's a Jewish tradition. This is also where Caleb is buried. I don't know about that one. It doesn't make a lot of sense to me because he was in Hebron, which would be south of here. But there is a tradition that says that, so I note it. It's not scripture. It's not anything I'm promising is true. I'm just saying there are people who think that that's the case. So our overview of Joshua. We have crossed the Jordan. We've seen mostly Israelite victory after victory. They had had a couple of defeats. The northern tribes of Canaan had united to try and fight against the Israelites and stop them from taking the Promised Land. There's still the southern mountains, the coastal Mediterranean area, and the Philistines are still in the Promised Land. But overall, we've seen the Israelites move up the eastern side of the Jordan. They've crossed the Jordan on this map near Jericho, and they started to spread out, but especially went north. so far towards the Sea of Galilee. And that puts us into the book of Judges. Now, if this isn't obvious, I'm doing kind of a high-level overview on these, as I've done largely in the past, but I don't want to necessarily nitpick every little battle that happened, because they're not all necessarily spiritually significant. Of course, they were significant enough to record in the Bible, but I'm trying to set context for either people or major events or major locations for us to look back at, and try not to get bogged down in every little city that's ever mentioned. I'll take some water. Good time for that. So in Judges chapter 1, we see what happens after Joshua passes, and this has been kind of the spiritual golden age for Israel. This is as close as they're ever doing everything right, is in the time of Joshua. After the death of Joshua, the Israelites asked the Lord, "Who of us is to go up first and fight against the Canaanites?" We pause there. Up means geographically, of course. They're talking about going up into the mountains to take possession of land still held by the Canaanites. They're not talking about north, they're talking about south. They're talking about elevation. Verse 2, the Lord answered, "Judah shall go up. I have given the land into their hands." The men of Judah then said to the Simeonites, their fellow Israelites, "Come up with us into the territory allotted to us, to fight against the Canaanites. We will in turn go with you into yours." So the Simeonites went with them. Of course, that's a very, very fair deal. You help us out, we'll help you out, and we'll both get our inheritance. So we've seen the Israelites in Ephraim. That's where we've been, particularly these last few chapters. It's worth remembering at this point now, Judah is the firstborn of Jacob, of Israel. And he was the fourth oldest son, but the other three had been passed over for various reasons, that they're not allowed to receive the firstborn inheritance of Jacob. So Judah becomes firstborn of the tribes. It's not an order thing, it's not a chronological order. It's a different sort of order. So you can just eyeball this and see that land of Judah is bigger than what the share that a lot of the other tribes are getting. And Manasseh is split into two. So it's comparable when you look at Judah versus Manasseh, or Judah versus Manasseh. So Judah is the largest tribe by population, certainly. There's the two census that happens back in the book of Numbers, and you can see consistently that Judah is the largest of the tribes. Simeon is going to join them because their inheritance is down here. They're both moving in the same direction to get to their share of the promised land. They're dealing with the Canaanites, the Amorites, and the Hittites, and they're not quite dealing with the Philistines just yet here. The Philistines are over to the west. They're going to be working here towards the east of the Philistines so far.
So they cross the Jordan, they cross from east to west.
Yes. Yes, they had come up on the eastern side of the Dead Sea, taken possession of the eastern lands for Reuben, Gad, and Manasseh, crossed to near Jericho, the Gilead area, which is highlighted on a few of these maps, but not this one. And now we're looking to go towards the south. And down here is where they had been initially defeated before wandering the desert. All right. So in Judges 2, we start seeing the pattern of the book of Judges. It's kind of a three-beat thing that keeps happening the same every time. In verse 18, whenever the Lord raised up a judge for them, he was with the judge who saved them out of the hands of their enemies as long as the judge lived. For the Lord relented because of their groaning under those who oppressed and afflicted them. But when the judge died, the people returned to their ways even more corrupt than those of their ancestors, following the other gods and serving and worshiping them. They refused to give up their evil practices and stubborn ways. The first time we're going to see one of these judges named is in chapter 3, verse 7. The Israelites did evil in the eyes of the Lord. They forgot the Lord their God and served the Baals and the Asheroths. The anger of the Lord burned against Israel so that he sold them into the hands of Cush Rishathim. Good luck to me. Of Aram Naharaim, to whom the Israelites were subject for 8 years. But when they cried out to the Lord, he raised a deliverer, Othniel, son of Kenaz, Caleb's younger brother, who saved them. The Spirit of the Lord came upon him, so he became Israel's judge and went to war. The Lord gave Cushan-Rishath, king of Aram, into the hands of Othniel, who overpowered him. So the land had peace for 40 years until Othniel, son of Kenaz, died. So I had mentioned either last week or week before that this is Caleb's son-in-law. He becomes the first judge that we see of Israel. He was part of Caleb's effort to take Hebron. He had promised his daughter in marriage to whoever took this territory. Othniel is the one who does that. So he's got a big connection in all this, and he has been a major part of the Israelite campaign till now. So who was this that was actually oppressing Israel for these years? And there's evidence for various people. The general land that they're coming from kind of suggests the people who are going to be known as the Assyrians, although they're not really called the Assyrians yet. The land that's being referred to here that they're coming from is northwest Mesopotamia between the Euphrates and Tigris River. So that's kind of how we're getting a ballpark of who this might actually be. Rishathim means double wickedness. So this is probably not what somebody called themselves. This is what the Israelites were calling this person who came in and oppressed them. You could understand where they might call somebody the double wicked, or Ivan the Terrible, as somebody else might call him. You know, he wasn't going around calling himself that. And this is an area that Abraham would have traveled. Well, both are true, actually, because he's Abraham to us, but he was Abram at the time he did this. He traveled on this way to the Promised Land. He had come up from the northeast and come south to the Promised Land. So a look at the book of Judges as we've seen in chapter 3. And I'm skipping over some, because it's the exact same pattern every time. The Israelites get saved, they start rebelling, they go back to the pagan practices, they go into oppression from somebody, and God raises up a judge. So there's only so many times you can see repeat the same pattern. But in Judges 3, we see 3 different times that they've been oppressed. So Israel was about 8 years. And then we saw Othniel here. It's hard for me to get arrows that stand out when I'm pointing on these things, but hopefully if you're looking at slides, it's a little easier to tell. But Othniel is the first judge mentioned, and this is the area that this map is saying they were in. I've got questions on some of those locations, but I can't prove it. So we're going to classify this under definitely maybe. The second oppressor that happens is Moab in Judges 3. And for 18 years, they're going to oppress it. Othniel was from the tribe of Judah, by the way, because he was the son-in-law of Caleb. Caleb was the spy sent from Judah. And this is the land of Judah that he's in. In Judges 3, we're going to see the second judge. He's going to come from Benjamin. And this is the Ehud with the prophet Deborah. We're going to see more about that in a moment. And then there's this strange one involving the Philistines, although it points here, which is why I don't understand this map entirely, because the Philistines were down here, but I'm not going to quibble with it. I'm just going to say it's a possibility. This judge that's mentioned there doesn't have a tribe that we can assign to them, and the name isn't even Hebrew. So there's even a question if this judge wasn't from Israel. But first, let's look at Deborah in Judges 3. Again, the Israelites did evil in the eyes of the Lord, now that Ehud was dead. So the Lord sold them into the hands of Jabin, king of Canaan, who reigned in Hazor. Sisera, the commander of his army, was based in Haggim. Again, good luck to me on these names. Because he had 900 chariots fitted with iron and had cruelly oppressed the Israelites for 20 years, they cried to the Lord for help. Now Deborah, a prophet, was the wife of Lapidoth, was leading Israel at the time. She held court under the palm of Deborah between Ramoth and Bethel in the hill country of Ephraim. And the Israelites went up to her to have their disputes decided. Now, wife of Lepithah, it could be a husband, which would make sense, obviously, when you're saying the wife of. The name could also suggest that she had a really fiery personality. There's an implication of fire in the name when you look at the original Hebrew. So that's this pointer, but it points back to here, just so we're clear. I was just pointing to the name with the arrows. Barak is supposed to deliver the Israelites. He's the one who Deborah says, hey, God picked you. You're supposed to free the Israelites. And he believes, but not fully. He's like, well, if you go with me, that'll be good enough. But I don't know about going on my own. And that, of course, leads to the story of, well, God's going to deliver them, but because you didn't do what you were supposed to, instead of being by your hands, it's going to be by the hands of a woman. And then one of the slave girls kills the oppressor, and then they're saved. Barak is leading, I can talk, an army from Naphtali. So it's one of the northern tribes up here that he's coming down from. And he's rescuing the Israel from the Canaanites. And if it's not extremely obvious what I'm doing right now, I'm trying to highlight the tribes that these various judges are coming from, because it shows it wasn't just one tribe that was doing it. These judges aren't all coming out of Judah, for example. They're not all coming out of Levi, for example. We keep seeing kind of a different tribe take the lead throughout all of these oppressions. And in Judges 6, we see one of the most famous of the judges, this man named Gideon. That's 5-minute warning, okay. Israelites did evil in the eyes of the Lord, and for 7 years he gave them into the hands of the Midianites. So again, we're seeing a different oppressor as well pretty much every time we do this. Because the power of Midian was so oppressive, the Israelites prepared shelters for themselves in mountain clefts, caves, and strongholds. They're not in cities. They're not out in the plains. They are hiding. They are staying out of sight. Gideon is from the tribe of Manasseh. He is to rescue the people from Midian, and they seem to come, the Midianites seem to have come from the east and crossed the Jordan, much as the Israelites have. And notably, Midian was a son of Abraham. Now, we don't talk a lot about them, but at the end of Abraham's life, it gives these lists of other sons that he had. And in a previous week, we looked at kind of how they had spread out to the areas surrounding Israel, possibly because Abraham wanted a buffer for Israel in the future. This is not somebody who's supposed to go to war with Israel. They are not doing a good thing. The area they settle in seems to be on this eastern side of the Red Sea. And they have traveled up, similar to how the Israelites have, to the eastern side and crossed the Jordan. Another thing I wanted to note is there's an alternate theory that Midian is further east. This is not the only possible location for the Midianites, but this is one of them. So Gideon, of course, God says your army's too big. That's in Judges chapter 7. His army camps in an area that's called the Spring of Herod, and an army of over 30,000 is reduced to 300. That's quite a reduction. This is about 17 miles southwest from the Sea of Galilee, and it even has a website for it. So this is the Sea of Galilee, would be southwest here. Of course, the Jordan would be to the east, and that's where Gideon's army seems to have camped. And this is a look from the website at what those springs look like. So it's a very lovely place they were at this time. And if you ever want to look at these websites, because a lot of these places do have these things, are here. And if the Midianites had crossed the Jordan, then of course it makes sense that the Israelites are kind of camped to fight them at the Jordan, in between Galilee and the Dead Sea. So the region makes sense when we're talking about this traditional location that they tell us it could have been. And I think that's where I'm going to stop for this week. It's going to be a touch early, but I've also got some other things I got to do to get Sunday ready here. So thank you for your time and attention, and we'll look forward to Judges 10 next week.